found your way into the panel Understanding the Cultural and Sexual Revolution. With the sweeping cultural changes going on, even in our country today, the things that once seemed to be decades away have happened just in the span of the last few years. From Caitlyn Jenner on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine to Plan B pill on the shelf of the local drugstore, a generation of young people is inheriting a culture in which sexual identity is considered self-determined and fluid, and sexual activity is erroneously separated from one's whole personhood. I believe that's what makes this panel so significant and important that we're about to hear today. Discussing the cultural and sexual revolution are Drs. Nanci Coppola, Pat Fagan, and Regina Akosa. I'll introduce each of them, and they will have about 15 minutes to present. And in order to give them ample time, we'll reserve all our questions until after their presentations. First up is Dr. Nanci Coppola. She serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Program Reach Incorporated. It's an organization dedicated to educating, equipping, and empowering youth with the knowledge needed to make healthy choices. Dr. Coppola has unique experiences both in the medical field and in her extensive background in teaching and curriculum development. That led her to develop something called Healthy Respect Youth Development Program. Especially noteworthy about this program is that it meets the requirements for health education in New York State Department and the U.S. Department of Education. It's quite remarkable. She's widely sought after as a speaker in the fields of sexual health education and youth development. She's published several articles, both in the medical and social science fields. And in her spare time, with her medical and educational background, she also has a master's degree in community health administration and health education. Dr. Pat Fagan is a psychologist and the director of Marriage and Religion Research Institute. It's a social science institute studying the impact of marriage, family, and religion on children, adults, and society at large. He is a native of Ireland. My brother would love to know which way Dr. Fagan is an Ireland native. He began as a grade school teacher in Cork, Ireland, before becoming a psychologist in Canada in the mid-1980s. Dr. Fagan moved from clinical work to public policy and discourse on issues affecting the family. He began at the Free Congress Foundation, where he worked with Senator Dan Coates of Indiana, and ultimately was appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary for Family and Community Policy at the Health and Human Services Department under President George H.W. Bush. Dr. Fagan has also served as a Senior Fellow in Family and Cultural Issues at the Heritage Foundation for 13 years before he moved to the Family Research Council and began the Marriage and Religion Research Institute. And lastly, to tell you about our guest, Dr. Regina Akosa. She comes all the way from Nigeria, and this is Dr. Akosa's first trip in the States. So be sure to give her a warm American welcome. Yes, make sure you eat some good fried food too, Dr. Akosa. She is a part of the Happy Home Foundation. It is a non-governmental and non-for-profit organization within Nigeria. Some of the goals of the Happy Home Foundation include defending, promoting, and fostering concern and respect for the dignity and right of every human being, along with promoting the reduction of the incidence of HIV and AIDS in Nigeria, along with promoting the reduction of maternal and child mortality rates, through providing accurate information and values to the public. This organization also serves to empower adolescents by equipping them for leadership and parental roles. Some very worthy goals. So would you join me in welcoming all of our panelists? And Dr. Coppola up first.
First only so that they can go there. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about brain development and its impact on adolescents and high-risk behaviors. And so if we're at a conference on families, why am I talking to you only about adolescents? And I think the last couple of speakers today really stressed to us that if we want to strengthen families, we have to start by helping the future leaders of families. and the future leaders of families are today's youth. And if they are not equipped to be not the best in the world, but the best for the world, they will never know how to form stable families. And without their help in this journey, we cannot win this battle. So since those future leaders are adolescents, and we're working on the formation of healthy adolescents, and we heard yesterday that the family is the factory where people are made, we need to work in those family units to teach teens how to be in a family. And the only way for us to teach them how to be in a family is for us to understand where they are in terms of their developmental ability to understand the consequences of the choices that they make today and the impact that those choices will have, not only on their futures, but on the futures of their potential families and their current families. So in our work in youth development, our motto, stolen from the medical creed, the Hippocratic Oath, since I am a physician first and foremost, is to do no harm. And we teach the kids to do no harm to themselves, to others, and to their future. And in assessing the choices that they have to make, we tell them to just ask themselves those three questions. If the choice I'm about to make is going to harm me, or my future, or someone else, then clearly that's not a choice I should be making. So our objectives in the next 12 to 13 minutes are to help you acquire a basic knowledge of adolescent brain development, to understand its impacts on adolescent decision making, and then to give you some ideas of how we can support and guide adolescents so that they can deal with the peer pressure to engage in tobacco, alcohol, drugs, violence, and sexual activity. And first and foremost, our youth development program is really aimed at teaching children to abstain from sexual activity outside of a long-term, mutually monogamous, committed relationship that we call marriage. But we know that all of these behaviors cluster together. And so if we talk to children about their sexual choices in isolation, we will never get them to make healthy choices. So what are the challenges that we see in adolescent health? First of all, brain development is not complete and decision-making areas are not mature in adolescence, and we'll talk a lot about that. Emotional development in terms of adolescence is problematic because they want to be independent and yet they need our protection as adults. Their mental development at this stage is allowing for an emergence of analytical thinking, but they have all of these hormones going around, floating around in their brain that are causing undue physical stresses that we all can remember if we stop and think back decades ago to when we were their age. The issue is that society today is putting a lot more pressure on youth, and so they don't have the skills that they need in order to make healthy choices. Very interestingly, Barna Group, we commissioned a study this past spring to ask teens across the United States where they think the most pressure comes from to engage in sexual activity. And 4 in 10 teens said the person who pressures them the most to be sexually active is their health teacher. Not their boyfriend or their girlfriend, their health teacher, because they are normalizing these behaviors in health classes, not only across the country, but across the globe. If we think it's bad here in the US, we need only look to the north, to Canada, to see the abomination of what they're doing with sexual health education. And most other countries are just as bad. So here's what a normal adult brain should look like. And what we look at is the frontal lobe. I'm not going to teach you anatomy and physiology. I won't bore you. But I just want you to pay attention to one thing. The frontal lobe of the brain, executive functions, thinking, planning, organizing, problem solving, emotions, behavioral control, and personality all rest in the frontal lobe. So if teen brains are like adult brains, then the frontal lobe should take care of decision making in teens, and they should all make good decisions, right? Unfortunately, there's one problem. The teenage brain is under construction. And good scientific research has proven to us in the past 10 years that the frontal lobe of the brain does not develop until males are 27 years old and in females 25. It's a scary thought to think that they don't have the ability to have the part of their brain that tells them what the things they do today, what impact it will have on their tomorrows until they're 25 or 27. What's the average onset of sexual activity in this country? Much younger than 25 to 27. So Jade Bead is basically the researcher who, through grants from the National Institute of Health, did some work in the late 1990s and through about 2005, really studying the teenage brain and proving, using science, that that portion of the brain does not develop until we reach what most people consider to be adulthood. So precisely what's going on in the brain is that the areas of the brain that are affected by those hormones that I said were surging in teenagers are the very areas of the brain that need to be functioning in order to figure out consequences. So some people will say, well, that makes no sense. You know, God in his infinite wisdom would not, devise this brain that didn't allow teens to make good choices. But here's the thing. We learn by taking risks, right? We should take risks in a controlled environment. And when your frontal lobe is fully functioning, you're no longer a risk taker, right? As we get older, we're less inclined to take risks, and that keeps us safe. But as teens, as developing adolescents, we need to be able to explore and figure out who we are and what we want to be. And the only way that we can do that is if our brain allows us to not fear taking those risks. So it is by design. But the parents and the adults are also there by design to guide our children through healthy decision making when their brains can't do it for them. So here's the other problem. We have all those hormones floating through the brain, and the brain is really the most important and largest sex organ in the body. So unfortunately, for the teens, that brain development is interfering with all of the choices that have long-term impact. And when we think about sexual activity in teens, we're not really so concerned about just the teen pregnancy. Remember that teen pregnancy itself is not an illness. We're worried about disease states. I'm worried about the fact that teens who are sexually active are far more likely to commit suicide. I'm worried about the fact that teens who are sexually active are far more likely to contract a sexually transmitted infection or disease than are adults who are sexually active. I'm worried about the fact that teens who partner with multiple people before they settle down and get married are less likely to form stable attachments to the person they wind up marrying. And I'm worried about the impact that that will have on their future children. So the thing about, we'll just go back here for a second, the thing about brain development and the fact that we don't have fully functioning brains until we're 25 has been recognized by insurance companies for a long time, right? Your insurance premiums go down when you hit 25. They knew it before medicine knew it. They just had all the data that showed after 25 people get into fewer accidents, right? But now we have the proof that shows why that happens. So in addition to all of that, the average teenage brain also has a lot of other things that are going on that are interfering with their making good and healthy choices, right? So here is certainly not a physiological or anatomical template of the brain, but just showing you what's going on there. They have rebellion centers and super rebellion centers, and I'm not fitting in. And the part of their brain that's worried about them being indestructible and being cool and not having all the answers and figuring out, do they want to love their parents, do they hate their parents? All of this is going on in a brain that is not wired to help them make the healthier choice. And so it is very important that the adults be there and guide them through this most critical period of development. And it is just around the time that a teen turns 13 to 14 that everything starts going haywire. And it is the 14 to 25-year-old period where they are at most risk for making unhealthy choices. And when precisely is it that most parents turn life over to their teens? When they hit high school, when they're 14. They can make decisions for themselves. They were more capable of making decisions for themselves when they were at 10, when we were helicopter hovering parents, right? And now that we've walked away, they're totally lost, and we want to know why they make uninformed choices. So to complicate this all, we also have dopamine floating through the brain, and dopamine is found in its highest levels during adolescence. And what dopamine tells us is that everything new feels good. So we have to explain to teens that just because something might feel good, or we might perceive that it might feel good, doesn't mean that it's something that we should be engaging in. Interestingly, when we look at brain science, when you experiment with new activities between the ages of 13 and 25, when the brain is under construction, you are much more likely to become addicted to those activities. So teens who start using alcohol or drugs or exposed to pornography are far more likely to become addicted than people who become exposed to those substances or those activities later on in life. So when an adolescent tries a new behavior, then those dopamine levels go up. It is far more exciting for the teen in terms of brain chemicals than it is for an adult who experiments. And so just specifically, if we look at alcohol alone, teens who engage in any alcohol use under the age of 15 are 5 times more likely to become alcoholics than someone who doesn't use alcohol until they're 18. Okay, legal age here in the US in most states is 21. But if they just wait until they're 18, they're far less likely to become addicted. People who engage in sexual activity under the age of 15 are much more likely to become sex addicts. And it just goes on and on. So if we look at adolescents, then what's the equation? They have this immature prefrontal cortex, plus those high levels of dopamine that I talked about, plus the intense emotional responses that we all know about because we've all seen teenagers who are perfectly calm 1 second and with their absolute best friend, and then 2 minutes later they hate that person, never want to see them again, and they're totally irrational, and they do the same thing to parents, and that's because they have that slam the door cortex in their brain now that goes away as they get older, right? And so what does that all add up to? It adds up to increased risk-taking behavior. So clearly, we have to worry about how we look at risk-taking in adolescence. And I did say that risk-taking is necessary, right? So some risk-taking is normal. They need to have the opportunity to gradually progress to adulthood. And that's accomplished by having them engage in activities that help them to learn how to explore adult roles, how to assume adult responsibilities, how to experience adult rewards, and how to acknowledge adult consequences. So when we fail to make threats of consequences with our youth and fail to follow through on the promises of those consequences that we have made, we contribute to their unhealthy decision making. So all of that experimenting needs to happen, all of that exploring needs to happen, but it needs to happen in a well-designed, well-confined environment that we call a stable, observant family, okay? So throughout adolescence, there's a tendency not to think about consequences before taking actions, and that leads to risky decisions. So during adolescence, we need to worry about the influence of peers. So it's really important to make sure that those strong emotions of turning on and turning off and becoming one person or another and having those mood swings is really guarded and watched by parents and parental figures, so that when there is problematic behavior, we become aware of it early on. And so it's very important that as we go through helping children learn how to take healthy risks, such as academic challenges and spiritual development and community service and participating in sports and other activities, that we replace the risk behaviors with healthy challenges. So let's look quickly at the risks that aren't healthy. Obviously, drugs, gangs, alcohol, violence, cigarettes, sex. What's the story that's going on here? If we look at the youth risk behavior surveillance system, we know that children are engaging in these risk behaviors at astronomical rates. 18% of children surveyed have said that they have carried a knife or a gun to school in the 30 days prior to the survey. 25% of them have been involved in a fight, and 10% of them have been hit by either their boyfriend or girlfriend in the year before the survey. Most alarming to me was that 7% of teens have been forced into sexual activity against their will in the 1 year before the survey. 35%, and this is 15 to 19-year-olds now, 35% of these 15 to 19-year-olds have had a drink, 21% of them have been binge drinking. In terms of drugs and alcohol, this is getting worse, okay? Sexual activity and teen pregnancy is on the decline in this country, but drug use and alcohol use is going up, and since we know that they cluster together, as those go up, teen pregnancy will begin to go up again, most likely. Only 47% of teens have ever had sex, 15 to 19-year-olds. So that's the minority. So when kids are saying everyone's doing it, and that's what their health teachers are telling them, and that's why they're pressured by their health teachers to do this, it is a lie. And we have to put an end to that lie. But interestingly, most kids have had their first sexual experience when under the influence of alcohol and drugs, which is why we need to address all of these issues. Because brain development, or the lack thereof, in the absence of adult guidance, is going to wreak havoc on our society. So let's just look very quickly at the good habits that teens engage in, because when we look at those teens who were engaging in all those risk behaviors, only 4.5% of them report ever having brushed their teeth in the last 30 days. Less than 20% of them have been physically active for 60 minutes or more per day in the last 30 days. So we abandon adolescents to the impossibility of mature decision making if we give them just information and then say, do what is best. In order for us to improve the health outcomes and to change the trajectory of what is going on, we need to give teens a primary prevention message as it pertains to all risk behaviors. Give them the best possible outcomes. A health message says we avoid the risks, not reduce the risks. And I would just submit to you that over 95% of the programs that claim to be educating our youth in health classes across the country are not teaching them to avoid the risk. They are simply teaching them to reduce the risk. And they deserve so much more from all of us. I thank you.
Good afternoon. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. What occurred to me as you were talking was the role of a stable culture, where over generations the people who went before have worked out exactly how to guide people through these difficult, potentially difficult, but great years. But it takes a strong culture to guide youth who are full of energy and through those difficult paths. And what we see all around us, of course, is a deconstruction of culture and the lack of that. So over the next 100, 200 years, it takes a long time to build a culture. We have to rebuild the culture, and I do think this is one of the main motivators for having a strong culture. I'm going to address the issue of contraception. And before I start, I want to make clear I'm speaking here in my personal capacity, not as a member of the staff of Family Research Council, because they're We have no stand on contraception. We don't publish on it. We don't take public policy, which is why I'm speaking from my own knowledge of this area. We have in the audience actually a lady, Vicky Thorne, who knows much more about this than I do. So this is a tall order for me to speak. I'm going to deal mainly on, to give you an overview of what's happening in the research on this. I'm not going to dig deep into the research over the next year or two. You will see many papers coming out that will go deeper into it, but it's almost like a primer to give you an idea of what's coming, what's already there, but is getting translated into digestible forms that the lay public will begin to consume and see. The effects of contraception at the macro level we can see, and I think the plainest place to see it is in Europe. Europe is dying, and Europe knows it's dying. It's a big issue for many governments. I will be next week as a guest at a major European demographic conference to speak to ministers and to the heads of census. It's at this level. They have a problem they don't know how to solve, which is declining fertility. Fertility below the replacement level, which means that generationally the countries are getting smaller and weaker. So that's a big effect of, and one of the major players in that, it's not the only, but one of the biggest players in that is contraception. The other thing, that's a macro effect. Contraception is having another effect, actually. You can go where we've gone at this is at the global fertility level. Contraception at the same time is having an effect down into the smallest area of the bios. Your mitochondria, which is deep within your cells, not just at the cellular level, it's at the intracellular level. Contraception is changing the mitochondria. So from the macro right down to the micro. One of the things that is happening with all of the advances in technology and in biology and in science, and these advances are increasing all the time, the capacity to dig deeper, to measure, to see, just from the instrumentation, the application of physics and chemistry into instruments that can dig deeper and deeper into the bios. We're going to see more and more this effect. So this is just going to grow in the future. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of, I don't want to call it coming attractions, it's a great term, but you know what I mean. Now, one thing to keep in mind, contraception is the most used pharmacological item out there. Nothing compares to it in the use in medicine. It's the biggest medication prescribed, ingested. And it has huge economic consequences for the companies that use it. But essentially, women more and more women in their fertile years are bathing their bodies internally with a drug that is designed to suppress that which their body is designed to express. So you've got the biggest invasion, the biggest prescription of drugs ever to a huge and growing portion of women of the world during their fertile years to suppress their female bodily functioning. That's what's happening. With drugs that go right down to the mitochondria level, with unintended consequences, unforeseen, but now gradually coming out through the research in many, many different ways. The doctor just gave us a little sense of it in your field, so I'm going to go for it. Now, this bathing of the body has all sorts of effects on the woman, and we will go over some of those. One of the things I want you to bring to your attention is that here I'm dealing mainly with hormonal contraceptives. There are other contraceptives, but the biggest use is the hormone. Not necessarily, but it's huge. It fails. about 9%, the best figure I can get is 9% of conceptions that result in birth. 9% of births are of children who are conceived while the contraceptive is active in their mother's body. In other words, they are conceived into and grow in a contraceptive-bathed reproductive system. The very opposite to the system the body is designed to do. We're only beginning to explore the consequences of that for those children, biological consequences. You can round out the number, I think it's 9%, but 10 is not a bad rounding number. 9% actually is the more accurate at this stage. These are, okay, so that's a big overview. There are a number of areas. I divided the effects into three big ones: the social, the psychological, and the biological. The one where, and there are amazing findings, particularly in the social, psychological, and then in the biological, is naturally, because this is a biological phenomenon, it's where there is just the amount of research going on for all sorts of other reasons. It's very difficult to keep up with it. Let's review quickly some of, and I'm just going to give you the highlights, some of the social effects of contraception. It affects the woman's perception of the attractiveness of the man she's thinking of dating or marrying. If she were not on contraceptive, she would probably choose somebody different. And at a conference organized by Vicki Thorne here in the audience, there was an amazing video of a couple who were not contracepting during their courtship, but after getting married, decided to use the pill because they didn't want to have children immediately. And it had the effect of the opposite. The man who was attractive to her, and she was delighted to marry and all the rest, when she went on the pill, he suddenly became unattractive. And they almost got a divorce. But in between, figured that this might have something and dropped the use of the contraceptive, and the attractiveness was restored. That's just one case. That's not, but that is an illustration of what happens. There's a lot of very good social psychological research going on, particularly in Britain, on the effect here. You probably have heard of the effect of contraceptives on a woman's olfactory perception of the male. For instance, some of the experiments they take, keep an eye on the time because we can go on forever here, and I'm Irish and we love talking. And particularly on sex. Okay, a lot of very good, really high-grade academic controlled experiment research we're doing, which is teasing this out and verifying that it does have this altering effect on women, on the men they will choose, the attractiveness. And one way to sum it up, actually, that Vicki just, in an earlier conversation today, put it, the woman on contraceptive is going to essentially mistakenly choose a man that's more like her father than the man who needs to be her husband. That sounds a little strange. Why? Because what it does, it suppresses her capacity to look for somebody who's very different, which actually genetically and all the rest is going to be much better for the child. And what she's looking for is she will seek a protector rather than what I would call a breeder, a good one to mate with and to bring different children. So very different altering. And of course, what that does is it narrows the spectrum of biological and genetic differences that the child inherits. And we do know that the broader the spectrum, the stronger the next generation, the narrower the group. And that's a huge effect that's only going to play out with intergenerational research. But already, the social psychologists, biological social psychologists, are teasing this. That has huge consequences. That one fact alone has has huge consequences on the mating and the marrying. One of the other big areas in the psychological is in the areas of stress, anxiety, jealousy, moods, depression, suicide, and sexual satisfaction and desire. The way I would sum it up, as I've been combing through this literature, I'm not a biologist, but I don't have to read research if you're doing it long enough, is that there are a lot of contrary findings in many of these areas. With some women, it increases the positive. In other women, the same thing decreases and actually gives them negatives. So you can say from the research, these contraceptives are going to lead to this bad result, or this positive, or this negative. In some it leads to positive, in other it leads to negative. So you have a very confusing set. This is true on depression, anxiety, jealousy, etc., etc. On the jealousy one, actually, that's a little different. Most of the findings point towards it increases jealousy and the distortion of perception of interpersonal realities in relationship with the opposite sex on the part of the woman. So she will misread her husband quite a bit. For me, the consequences of this at this stage is that women who take contraceptives are essentially playing Russian roulette with many of these outcomes for themselves. Their moods, their anxieties, the potential for jealousy, and nobody can guide you. There isn't just enough guidance in the research except to say, you may have this or you may have that. You don't know. Suicide? We've got a lot, actually, there's a lot of conflicting research here, and depending on the sample size and the robustness and all the rest. But on the suicide depression, which ties in with Nanci's earlier presentation, it does look like it's tending much more towards increased depression, and for a certain amount, an increased probability or possibility of suicide. On the big social realm, we have seen, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist or anybody to see the increase in out-of-wedlock births, the increase in divorce, the increase in abortions are all related to the increase in the use of contraceptives. There's definitely a whole massive amount of correlational work, and a lot of common sense will fill in a lot of the gaps. Let's progress to what is the real cutting edge area, which is much more the biological and what's happening there. The fundamental insight is that there's a big difference between the estrogens that are used in the hormonal contraceptives and the estrogen the body produces. The body produces a natural estrogen. For most of these, they are chemically made. They're derived and they're manufactured, and they're different. They're almost the same, but they're slightly different. And they have ubiquitous effects. These estrogens are both ubiquitous and promiscuous. They go all over the place. Estrogens are used, just the natural estrogens. There are many of them, multiples of them, that go all through the body. When these slightly different chemically manufactured estrogens go, they will link onto other receptors through the body that the natural estrogens will not. Now another thing is, and this I think is potentially very important down the road, because the pharmacological companies will have a huge difficulty with this. There is in many of these not a dose response thing, right? The more that you give, the more likely you're to get this response. In many cases, just a little dose can have a bigger effect than a bigger dose. Now that's a real curveball to somebody who's trying to manufacture something that's safe. And to my knowledge and reading the literature, nobody has a handle on this one. They're only beginning. There's an area that's very close. because it's really dealing with estrogen, estrogen derivative, estradiol, and these related areas. You know the whole scare there was that's now translated into public policy, even at the UN and down, on the use of what we call soft plastics in food, and the banning of this, and the very same area, almost the identical same areas, are what you're dealing with in contraceptives. Okay? Where banning means, and everybody's right, like now you've got these harder plastics, and then you don't microwave soft plastic anything because you know you're ingesting stuff that's going to change your, lead on to all sorts of cancers and all the rest of it. Contraceptive is quite close there. One of the deepest, and this in the future I think is going to cause, who knows if it's going to cause, but I think it will, this is just a pure personal hypothesis, it's going to cause the pharmacological companies that are making huge profits in this, lots of difficulties and lots of big payouts. There have already been big payouts, but you don't hear about them because they're arrived at in court, and part of the settlement is there is no publicity about it. Hundreds of millions of dollars. They should be actually much bigger. But that, so the public is not hearing about the consequences of contraceptives that have already been settled in court, and people getting big. Ooh, I have 1 minute left. So I'm going to wrap this up very quickly. It's epigenetic. There are beginnings of indications that contraceptive bring about hereditary changes that are transmitted across generations. And for men, it's not good. It's the male sex organ that is getting changed. And one of the areas they already have, there's a thing called hypospadia, which is where the opening of the penis through which both the urine and the semen comes is not at the tip and is back further or further, depending on the men. That is now three occasions of that being transmitted intergenerationally. It is definitely there in mice, transgenerational. And on this area, mice and males are very similar. Male humans are very similar. So huge areas coming. There have already been big settlements. Thrombosis is one of the big areas where there have already been huge settlements, but the public doesn't know about. Strokes, cancers. Strokes and cancers are two of the really big areas. But bone density, eye diseases, weight loss, brain structure, there's a thinning of the cortex happens, which has huge implications in the areas Dr. Nanci just talked. So this is just a bit of a teaser, a preview of coming maltractions. I don't want to call them attractions. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My topic is an African perspective on family breakdown, and it will be related to the sexual and cultural revolution that we are talking about. Well, I'm from Nigeria, so Nigeria will be the focus for this African perspective. And I would like to say that Nigeria is situated in West Africa, and all Africans share the same values when it comes to marriage and family life. And these are two institutions that are very highly cherished in the traditional African society. Nigeria, for instance, is a country of 300 ethnic groups. So this shows us a lot of diversity. But in spite of this diversity, cultural and language-wise, we have very many things in common, especially when it comes to marriage and family life, because across the diversities. And to show you how much we value marriage, we celebrate it traditionally. And it's something that is not just about the two people getting married. It's a family affair. Because even across the families, the village
And because this widely spread, is one of the safeguards for marriage stability, marriage and family stability in Africa and in Nigeria. Also, the fact that we cherish marriage and family life is shown in the fact that young people still look forward to marriage and family life. In short, in the place where I come from, the title Mrs. is still very much looked up to. And the desire of every girl is that she should have that title. And also there's a saying that a girl has 2 stages in her life. First, when she's addressed as the daughter of so-and-so, and another stage when she's addressed as the wife of so-and-so. So this shows us how much we value marriage and family life. There are 2 institutions that we don't want to do away with. Also, to go with this is the children that come out of marriage. We also cherish children a lot. So much so that a marriage that is childless is one of the things that, in short, people begin to wonder what has gone wrong. Is it that you have done something to offend the gods that will mean that you will not, because children are looked at as precious gifts from God. So if you don't have children in your marriage, everybody will begin to wonder. And this idea of being gift from God also means that in the society we come from, we don't count children. It's an abomination to say how many children you have. Whenever you're asked how many children you have, you say, it's the will of God, the gift from God. So that will tell the person already that this is a no area. So for us, marriage is not only about love, it's very procreative. And procreation is even more important than love. And this is because in the traditional African setting, love and sexual attraction may not be at the beginning of the marriage because most marriages are arranged. These are values that develop with time. And it's also one of the reasons why the marriages last long. Because as they gradually develop, the couple learn more about each other and they learn more to live with each other. So love for us is not a firework experience that finishes in no time. It's something that is long lasting. Marriage is also something that that must be looked after by everybody in the society, the family life and the marriage that gave rise to it. So what are the features that make marriage happy and stable? Before that, we can look at the definition of marriage as the communion of persons based on the love between a man and a woman. It's a long-lasting covenant of love and partnership between a man and a woman for the begetting of children, their care and education. And also about family, we said that family is the community of life and love of persons, father, mother, and their children, and relatives also, because in the African setting, we value the extended family, the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents, everybody form part of this household, including the domestic workers. So for us, anything that would lead to the happiness of the marriage, stability of marriage, invariably will lead to the stability and happiness of the family. Well, you may think that everything is rosy about marriage in Africa, family life. No, especially in these modern times. In the days gone by, our parents knew how to handle the situation they found themselves in. For instance, in the normal setting, African setting, the man is usually regarded as superior to the woman, and even when he's wrong, nobody dares to find fault with him. So everybody agreed, and the women learned to live with that. But in modern times, the modern reality is that women wouldn't want to take such things. So these are part of the tensions that are beginning to develop in the marriage and family life. But one of the safeguards, as I have said, is that it's something that is between the families, is across the village. So with the extended families being a support, and then the family support programs that we have been able to bring a measurable standard of stability and happiness to the marriages. Well, we look at the secrets of this stability, and I think the most important one is that famous saying by St. Paul, advising the married couples to be subject to one another out of reverence to Christ. With the advent of Christianity, most people invite Christianity. So the marriage and family life is not only now dependent on the traditional setting anymore. Christianity has greatly influenced us, such that a young person getting married from my side of the country would have had 3 ceremonies for that marriage: the traditional marriage, the civil marriage, and the Christian marriage. So these 3 ceremonies also are safeguards for stabilizing and making the marriage and family happy. So while they observe their Christian ideals, it helps them a lot to have that measure of stability and happiness. And so if the married couples would listen to what St. Paul says, the wives will be subject to their husbands, and the husbands will be submissive also to their wives. So it's a mutual thing, and with that, they're able to weather the storm. And then St. Paul also said husbands should love their wives just as Christ loved the church, and husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. Nobody ever else his body. And children should obey their parents, honor them, while parents also should not provoke their children. So all these advice help a lot for those who adhere to the Christian principles to have stability in their marriage. And then it also ensures that democracy reigns in the family. The equal dignity and responsibility that is characteristic of a happy family is also entrenched in this advice from St. Paul. Then one of the characteristics also about this is, just as the man is the head of the family, what St. Paul says, and we regard the woman as the heart of the family and the neck. And since the neck is the one that turns the head to the direction that the body needs the head to turn to, the woman is the one that turns the man to the direction that the family requires him to pay attention to. And that brings us to the mission of the father and the mother in the education of their children. Because for us, we look at education of the children as the most important part of the roles that parents play in the family. So for the father, his role is to form the character of the children and to protect his family through a purposeful leadership. So where that is deficient, of course, there will be a lot of problems. And this entails inculcating lifelong attitudes and habits, virtues, into the children, strengthening their character, their competence, their confidence, so much so that the children learn to live in the society with a balanced attitude. The father also teaches the children to respect and honor their mother by being the leader in this area, loving the wife, and by so doing, loving and honoring the wife. By so doing, the children will learn to honor, to love, and to respect their mother. So the father takes the lead. Then the mother also has the responsibility. Naturally, we know that the place of the woman is in the home, and the home is a place where the mother lives by being there. So it's the job of the mother to take care of everybody in the family. And from research, well, I would say that our own work in Happy Home Foundation, we are not at the moment based on research work, but we make use of research that people have done elsewhere. And most of the things we try to inculcate in the parents that benefit from activities is to share these research findings with them, and for them to realize that this work of education is very, very important for the family. As St. Paul has said, St. John Paul II has said, the fruitfulness of the conjugal love is not restricted solely to the procreation of children. It is enlarged and enriched by all those fruits of moral and spiritual life, which the father and mother are called to hand on to their children, and through their children to the rest of society. So if the parents recognize this fact that they have this singular role of educating their children, then they would have done a lot. And also, from research, it has been proved that mothers, if they really do their work, they do that work of binding with their children. And this bond that they form with their children goes a long way to make emotional stability in the children. When these children are neglected, it could cause a lot of harm to them, and this has been proved. Studying children that have been bred in the daycare centers, orphanages, and hospitals. And it has been proved that such children who lack that parental, especially maternal care, are deprived emotionally. And this emotional deprivement usually leads to all sorts of problems. It could cause problems with relationship, it could cause depression, it could cause violence in the child. And from all this, they have come to the conclusion that what we have in today's world, the violence we see everywhere, is as a result of children that have been deprived of this bonding with their mother. The bonding with the mother is not just about this stability, also the moral education that the children need come from the mothers, from the fathers, and from the grandparents. The moral and cultural education. These are transmitted by them. And when it is lacking, the problem will come. And most times when parents fail to do this, it is because either they are permissive or they are aggressively authoritarian. Either of them is not good for the child. And permissiveness is one of the problems that have led to what we find today. Sexual and cultural revolution is as a result of permissiveness. And what is characteristic of a permissive society? A permissive society is one with no fixed moral principles. Such a society ultimately gives rise to a bunch of irresponsible people. As we have said, the cultural norms and values that children grow up with are imparted by the parents and the grandparents. And when they don't have it, in a permissive society, everything is allowed. There is no restraint, no absolute objective moral values. Everything is relative and subjective, and individualism is celebrated. Somebody once asked J.K. Chesterton, what is the problem with the world? And he said, me. Me, meaning I, me, and mine. Individualism. And that is one of the hallmarks of a permissive society, where everything goes. A permissive society also maintains that all forms of sexual conduct which make one feel good should be considered morally, socially, and legally acceptable. And we know that a case in point is what, well, the world is witnessing today in Europe and America. Some African countries and other third world countries, maybe, but especially the epoch judgment of the U.S. Supreme Court took everybody by surprise. And also that of the Irish referendum, These are places that you would have thought that a measure of goodness would have reigned. That people have, because of this permissiveness, have forgotten what should be the normal thing. So we see that sexual revolution and cultural revolution is because of the failure of parenting. And that is why each and every one of us, like the theme of this conference is family, the promise begins with me. If each and every one of us here who is a parent, or the young ones who are about to become parents, if we are all committed to the education of the young people, as Dr. said, they are the future of society, they are the future of the family. So if we are well brought up in good families, I am sure that they will continue to be good.